suddenly appear, and I think someone's...
Hello. Oh, yeah. Hi, everyone. Welcome to this session this morning at the moment. So the topic for this morning's session is carbon and the opportunities. So we've got a few questions that have been set up for the panellists, but we're also welcoming any questions from the audience as well. We won't do it every question, but I'll open the floor up every now and then, so rather than wait till the end, in case you'll forget what the thread of your questions were. So initially, anyway, I'm just going to ask all the panellists to introduce themselves, because I'm sure they'll make a much better job of that than I would. Can we start on my left, Liam?
Hello, thanks. My name is Liam Sinclair. I'm a Professor of Animal Science at Harper. I'm involved with dairy teaching, but I also do research on methane reduction in dairy cows and also environmental impact, nitrogen, phosphorus, other areas as well. So that's my background and expertise.
Okay. Thank you, Liam. John?
Good morning, everyone. My name is John Powell. I'm Head of Agriculture Sectors Teams in DEFRA. I originally joined the Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries and Food some 40 years ago. Was there for 17 years, did various policy jobs, then spent 20 years out of the UK as an advisor to a number of EU new member state countries, setting up all their agriculture systems. Came back in 2018 and I've been Head of Agriculture Sectors now for 4.5 years.
Okay, thank you, John. Ed first and then Lyndon, thank you.
Hi there, I'm Edward Towers. I'm a dairy farmer from Lancashire. We milk Jerseys and Holsteins and we sell the milk to specialty coffee shops as a specific barista product. We've also been involved in feeding a product to reduce our methane emissions on the farm and the development of carbon credits. And I'm doing a Nuffield scholarship in the development of carbon credits and how new technology might help in that area.
Hello, and I'm Lyndon Edwards. I'm an organic dairy farmer from Chepstow, farming just on the banks of the River Severn on the Welsh border. And I'm also the board member for AHDB, and I chair the Dairy Sector Council at AHDB as well.
Thank you both. I suppose I better say a few words about myself as well. So I'm Head of Environment within AHDB. I've been in this role for about 18 months. So prior to that, I was working with the dairy sector as Head of Dairy Development in Wales, which the accent's probably a giveaway on that front. So as I said, we've got a few questions to ask the panels, but obviously open to any other questions as we go. So if we start with the first one. So I think we'll start with Lyndon. What opportunities do you see for dairy farmers to create a business strategy that aligns future requirements to reach net zero, whilst also improving financial resilience?
Okay, that's an easy one to kick off. I think the opportunities are massive, but I think first of all we have to know where we are today. So I think that sort of the whole baseline's where we are now, so we know where we can go and we can measure when we get there are really, really important. I think there are certain things that are, to me, no-brainers for all dairy farmers. I mean, I would sort of tend to refer to it as the marginal abatement curves, but in farmer terms, that's a win-win. So it's something that you can do for the environment, that's good for the environment, that's also good for your farm, good for your animals, and good for your profit on the bottom line as well. So some very, very simple examples. Animal genetics. You can make a 1% difference per year to the carbon on your farm from animal genetics. If you do the average job that's currently being done in Britain today, so the average improvement is 1% per year. If you're really, really good, you can probably do that as 3%. So that's a really, really easy win. Animal health and welfare is another one. Healthy animals, calving a little bit earlier. I think we've averaged to knock back the average calving stage by 1 month in the last few years. That's quite a very, very simple and easy win. You've got other things. I mean, I'm an organic farmer. I've grown deep-rooting herbal leys and legumes for years. Another really, really easy win. We find it's good for the animal health and good for the soil as well. Shall I stop there and let someone else have a go?
Lovely. Thanks, Lyndon. Liam, we'll move across to you and then back to Ed afterwards.
Well, I think you can consider it on a number of levels. If you're looking at reducing methane, and about nearly 50% of the carbon footprint of a cow comes from what's produced in the rumen, then just about everything that you want to reduce that carbon cost is what most farmers would want to do anyway. Higher producing animals, more fertile, healthier, things that Lyndon spoke about, so higher quality grass silage, a balanced nutrition to make sure that you're feeding animals appropriately. There's a number of additives that can be included that people have a lot of interest now, the most recent being 3-NOP, but that's an opportunity which will reduce it even further. But you've got other management factors which Lyndon sort of touched on. Fertility, so there's a difference of about 20-25% in the carbon footprint between herds that have good fertility versus poor fertility. Heifer replacement, between a quarter to a third of the carbon footprint of a litre of milk comes from the heifer replacements, because they are producing methane but they're not producing any milk. So getting those a lower replacement rate, so healthier animals and calving at 23-24 months, that can make a difference of about, again, another 10-15% on reducing your carbon footprint in there. So just about everything that you can do to reduce particularly methane and carbon is what farmers are going to want to do anyway. Genetics, as Lyndon spoke to, just now the genetic index by AHDB is looking at things such as health and performance, but there are ones being developed that are specifically will look at cows that inherently produce less methane as well. So there's a lot of opportunities there. I wouldn't be worried about it thinking, well, how is this going to affect my business? Ultimately, you have to make a profit. That's the key thing. If you're not making a profit, then it doesn't matter how efficient you are in terms of nitrogen use or carbon use or whatever. Profit is the bottom line as well. But most things that you'd want to do are going to improve your profit. So that's a good take-home message. There's lots of depressing things in terms of carbon and people get worried about, but I would take a positive from that point of view.
Great. Lovely. Thank you, Liam. That's really useful. Ed, anything to add to those two? And have you examples of your own to add?
Well, our example that Liam mentioned there was the methane suppression. So, as he said, 50% of your carbon footprint on a dairy farm can be enteric emissions, which is huge. We were measured a 30% reduction in our methane emissions, which then obviously results in a 15% reduction of our carbon footprint of the product. The probably two that haven't been mentioned, we've obviously talked about resource use efficiency, and generally just being a better dairy farmer reduces your carbon footprint. But the two that haven't been mentioned are probably precision ag, so the implementation of technology to really help with that decision making to allocate your resources more efficiently. And then obviously the 5 principles of regenerative agriculture, if you can implement them within your dairy farming, that's also going to improve your opportunities for net zero.
Thank you, Ed. I think it's really important. Obviously, you mentioned precision ag, but data is important, really important in making management decision. And without that information, it's really difficult to understand where you need to go and what you can do about it. So, John, do you want anything to add? But I am going to ask the next question to you as well. Okay. It's a bit of a follow-on, but yeah.
No problem. First of all, thank you, I'm sure, on behalf of all the panel, for the invitation to speak today on the panel. It's a great privilege. Now, the question is a good one. It's very strategic, and I think Lyndon picked up right at the start the important issue is where are we now? And I think we have to give credit to the dairy industry, because since 1990 emissions have fallen in the dairy sector by about 12%. That has plateaued in recent years, but good progress has been done. We have to also, I think, take into account that the UK emissions as a whole, 11% come from agriculture, of which 58% comes from ruminant animals and waste. So that's nearly 6% of the UK's emissions. I think we have to give credit to the Dairy Roadmap, which has been doing a great work, is a trailblazer across a number of sectors. So, you know, the foundations are there. There's a lot of good work has been done, and I think it's now how do we move that on. From a DEFRA perspective, certainly we very much do want to support the objectives of achieving net zero, but we also in parallel want to ensure that we have, the point Liam made, a resilient, profitable, productive farming sector. So the two have to go hand in hand. We're certainly keen to continue to support farmers on that pathway. There are a number of policies and proposals that we have in place. There's the measures through improved health and welfare of animals. There's the breeding issue, which Lyndon's already referred to, and maximising the uptake, for example, of low emission suppressing feed products. So I think lots have been done. I think it's a matter of really looking closely at what the options are for individual farms and putting them in practice, really. And there's plenty of advice and guidance around, and it's and policies and support that DEFRA are providing that can support you in that.
Thank you, John. Now, the next question, most of you will understand why I said it's a follow-on, and it's what funding opportunities are there to help them get them towards net zero? So, and how do they access it? So I'm going to hand this one straight back to you, John, if that's okay.
That's absolutely fine. I fully understand why you're doing that. The first thing to say is, of course, as I mentioned, DEFRA has a number of policies that we have been putting in place and will continue to put in place. Achievement of net zero is a government priority, as is, as I said, maintaining the financial resilience and profitability of dairy farms. We're obviously in a little bit of a transition phase following the general election with the change of government. The new government is looking at its approach to agriculture, it's looking at the policies that have been implemented before, it's looking at what's the best way of continuing to support the industry in these areas. What I can say is that there is a commitment to continue to support the industry in moving towards net zero. We're committed to supporting all farming sectors, increased levels of productivity, whilst increasing their sustainability and resilience. Now, there have been a number of grants. As I say, we're still looking at those. And in terms of access to them, you know, take-up has been quite good. The slurry grants, for example, we've seen a number of iterations of that over recent years. There's been grants from elsewhere in government for anaerobic digestion plants. I think that is another good option. Also, the capture of CO2 that can be used elsewhere is another asset. I think the opportunities to farmers to collaborate, I think, has got to be done. There are things you can do on farm, but there are also things that can be done together. But any collaboration, of course, must be of financial benefit to the farmers themselves. So DEFRA is keen to help and support. There will be support available, which I'll be able to, and others will be able to say more about in the coming months. But what I think I would say is that there are opportunities there to maximise the ability to translate farming practice into net zero reduction on farm.
Thank you. I'm going to turn to Lyndon and Ed now to ask, have you taken advantage of some of these funding opportunities from DEFRA or others?
Yes, we've been involved with SFI, which I think has gone a long way to get new farmers to look at some of the techniques that I've probably used on my organic farm for a long time. The herbal lays, I mean, it's been incredibly successful, so much so I can hardly buy any seed anymore. There's been such a demand for it. But we've also got to be a little bit careful what we wish for, because there's no one gold standard with how to farm for the benefit of the environment. And I'll give you a personal example. I grow lucerne with a mixture of white clover and timothy to cover the top of the soil. Well, I've never found a plant yet on my farm that's roots go down as deep as lucerne. I mean, like meters, it really does go down a long way. And that plant will last 5 or 6 years. And that will obviously be then putting carbon quite a long, long way in the soil. And the farther it goes in the soil, the longer it'll stay there. My landlord on that particular farm has also looked at SFI, doesn't like what I'm doing, and finds that he can make far more money if he has it back and ploughs up the lucerne and puts it into clover for the next 3 years, and no animals use it. So we've got to be a little bit careful what we wish for, because that's a short-term strategy that some people will look to take, because on paper it's a good option for the here and now. I think also sometimes we overlook the bloody obvious as well. So lime, pH of soils. I mean, if you want your crops to do well and to be capable of sequestering carbon, if you look around the world at the research that's been done, soil pH is really, really important. It's a really simple thing to do. I mean, every farmer used to do it years ago. We used to get grants for putting lime on, and everyone was up around 6.5 to 7. The average now is probably nearer 6. That's not good, and it's a simple, cheap, easy solution to actually do a good job for the environment and for the soil and for the health of the crops that are growing on it as well. So I think there's several easy answers. I think it's the right direction. I've got no problem with the direction, but I think we need to just be a little bit careful we don't have almost a standard operating procedure and forget the benefits of the knowledge that's around the periphery of there that might become unfashionable.
Thanks, Lyndon. Ed?
Yeah, so we've taken advantage of some of them grants, certainly the catchment sensitive farming grants and them sort of things, to cover yards and to cover roofs. And we're also in a protected landscape, so there's funding for farming in a protected landscape that we're currently looking at taking advantage of. Half of that needs to be environmentally focused and half of that can be more around productivity. So yeah, absolutely. One thing that I would say is that it's nearly a full-time job to apply, to understand what you're applying for, to get through the hoops. And so we've actually taken somebody on to help us with that. It's not something that I feel I can manage and run the business that we've got alongside. So getting the right help and consultant in there has been really useful for us to be able to make advantage of some of them schemes. I know some are designed to be more accessible than others.
Thank you, Ed. I think that's a very important point to make. Liam, do you have anything to add on what you've heard from the other panels members?
Yeah, I think the government has outlined, it published a document last year called the Carbon Budget Delivery Plan, which is for the UK as a whole in terms of how to reach net zero. And in that it has a section on land use and land use change, and what the government wants to see in terms of reaching that. So it gives a kind of guidance as to what farmers should be considering. And I think we've spoken about improving technical performance in there and precision technologies. I would also have an eye on where legislative requirements are likely to come in. And slurry would be a big one there in terms of ensuring you've got sufficient slurry stored. And I was speaking about 6 months. Obviously, covers are something that is going to come in and going to have to be implemented. So I would keep one eye on things that are likely to be enforced that you're going to have to do. And there have been various initiatives to underpin that. The Farming Investment Fund has been available. We've used that at Harper. We've put fans in with the cows. We've also put in an automatic weighing system, which also measures body condition score and mobility. And we've done, it's the first time, I mean, I've been teaching dairy for quite a long while. It's the first time I can remember the government recommending to go to 3 times a day milking, but that's explicitly within the Carbon Budget Delivery Plan, and we have gone to 3 times a day milking as well to make more money, but it also reduces your carbon cost, because one of the big factors that reduces it is the amount of milk that you produce. Some of the other ones which Lyndon referred to in terms of the SFI is available. They're not directly focused at it. The advantage with the SFI is that it's not capped, whereas some of these other initiatives are, and they've got distinct periods of time, some of which have passed now, in terms of looking at calf housing and welfare, which is another big area that they want to look at. But it's keeping an eye on when those come, because they are limited, and if you don't get in quite early, then you're likely to lose out for that. I mean, Ed said, it's a full-time job, and unfortunately, if you're standing milking cows the whole time, you may not have the time to get your head up and see what advantage you should be taking, but you need to be able to do that. There's another one in there called the Farming Innovation Programme, which is where farmers can be involved in doing research with organisations. It comes under what's called UKRI, so the research councils, and the government's keen for farmers to be involved in helping to promote and helping to both underpin but also come up with ideas on how to reach net zero as well. So, but again, that's another big area that often can be a little bit intimidating as a farmer to say, well, how do I get my head around this? And unfortunately, we haven't got the advisory services that we've had in the past to help farmers to do it. But I think taking some advice will be well worth the investment to make sure that you can decide what the most appropriate things are for your farm, and that you take advantage of potential schemes that are limited for periods of time, rather than suddenly find out a neighbour's got something and you didn't know anything about it until it's too late. But I don't know what other ones are likely to come up, but I would suggest that just keep an eye on it and get some good advice.
Thanks, Liam. I'm very aware that I've got some Welsh colleagues here today, but obviously the discussion very much has been on England since we've got John here from DEFRA. And I won't go into where we're at because I'm sure my colleagues will, but probably a way to go to catch up at the moment. Are there any questions from the audience at this point?
Thank you very much. I'm Bai Hua from Labrador University. We are working on the UKRI EPSRC project about using the digital twin and technology to help the sustainability of the agriculture, especially the net zero from the ruminant farming. So we developed the digital twin, and then we look at data from satellite and land use, and also the ground sensor, and also individual cows. So what we found difficult, as you mentioned, is about data. So the first thing to do the modeling and really understanding of the correlation about, for example, individual cow feeding and their bio data and the breed and the health and also productivity linked to the greenhouse gas is about the data. So we really want some more collaboration with the farming industry and then support from DEFRA, the government organizations. Access data is a big challenge. Yeah.
Thank you. Have you got any specific question to one of the panel linked to that?
Yes, that is my question. And then, so what's the government or DEFRA or from the top level of the government, and then how can we connect the research and into the and with really the data from industry, from farming industry? Yeah.
So basically asking how can we collate all the data that's available and how that can be made of use to the industry, whether that's on a farm level but also on a reporting level.
Yes,
so
true.
John, any thoughts on that? I mean, that's a big question.
I mean, it's a really good question, and I have to say data is and has been an issue across not just dairy sector but all sectors from recent years. Many of our supply chain fairness reviews that we've initiated have identified that lack of data across many sectors is a problem. How we rectify that ultimately is going to have to be some sort of partnership approach. Government can't just create data out of anywhere. It's going to ultimately going to have to come from farms, which means farmers cooperating. But how's that done in a structured way that's consistently collected and collated and recorded, I think is something that we all need to look at quite carefully. So I agree with the sentiments, but I don't think I have a solution for you at the moment. There are certain things that we do collect data on, that's for sure. We have production levels and milk delivery levels and milk prices, but I don't think we yet have enough data on some of the net zero benefits, although I know some people have referred to some of the percentage benefits that come about, but we probably don't yet have enough data. And I know the dairy roadmap perhaps is one route that we might be able to utilise to do some of that data collection.
And I think, if I'm honest, there's probably more information about emissions, but very little information about sequestration and net carbon. So I'm going to pass this one intentionally over to Lyndon, because obviously he's aware of some of the work we're doing in actually getting some on-farm data based on carbon stocks. So.
Thank you, Delyth. Yes, we have a project that is due to be announced this month, I think, Delyth?
Yeah, the farmers will be identified.
Yes. So we're looking for 170 farms across all sectors. I think there's about 50 in dairy. And we're looking to get that baseline data so we actually know what carbon stocks are on farm, and that's below ground, but also above ground as well. So trees, hedgerows, and different crops. And unless we know where we are now, we don't know whether we've made progress in 5 years' time. So to me, this is a really, really important place to start. With data, I mean, I've had multiple different audits done and measurements taken of where we are. And because they're using Tier 1 reporting, we don't feel when we're doing a good job we're rewarded. So if you're doing a particularly good job on one area and your own farm or your own locality is taken as national averages, it doesn't encourage farmers to actually make progress, because it might be costly in some cases to make that progress, and you won't get the credit for it anyway. So that's something that we've also got to move forward. And data in all its forms is, I mean, Ed just said that it's the bane of his life, because all the things you've got to do, you've got to give data to so many different organisations in the industry that want data. They don't all want the same data, they want slightly different data. Probably the bulk of it is the same data, but then there's other bits that, in my cases, your milk processor might want this, and the Environment Agency might want that, and someone else might want another bit. That whole data thing is something that the industry has got to get its head around and find an easy way for it to work. And I know it's something that AHDB are looking at the moment, and how we can help with that. But the sheer time involvement for a farmer to actually get all the data into all the right places at the right time is huge. And I think that I would certainly hope that we can work very closely with government, because I think that government need this data as much as we do. So I would certainly hope that in the new spirit of cooperation and industry coming together going forward, we can actually all work together to actually get this base data for everyone's benefit and then use it appropriately.
Lovely, thank you, Lyndon. Liam, have you got anything specific?
No, I mean, I think data is a big thing. But I think the two big questions are that we don't know exactly how much cows are producing on an individual farm in terms of methane. It's a big unknown. Lots of people speak about it. Lots of people say what you should do to reduce it. But if you do it, you don't really know whether you have reduced it or whether you haven't reduced it. Sometimes reducing that methane, for example, will come through in terms of performance, but it doesn't always do that. And I think that provides a bit of a reluctance in farmers to say, well, why would I do it? And it's either likely to come in because a milk purchaser says that that we want you to do it because we want to differentiate our milk, which is essentially the same as another company's, but we want to make out that it's different. So they're going to ask to do it. Or the government comes in and says, you need to do something. Or there is a financial benefit from other means of reducing it in terms of fertility or milk performance. What we'd like to do, and we've been discussing it, and hopefully we'll get some funding, is actually go onto farms and measure how much methane is produced and develop means of being able to predict that more accurately on individual farms, so that you know that you can see. So if a farmer's doing something, that they can get benefit from doing that. And that would mean going on to a number of different farms and measuring it and getting ways of predicting it. We can't predict it very well. You can either measure it or you can predict it, perhaps in something in milk. And again, we're looking at ways of being able to do that, so markers in milk to say, well, we know that this cow is producing more or less methane than another cow. The other big unknown, and I speak to my soil scientist colleagues, is how much is in the soil, how much is being sequestered as well. And there's lots of big discussions, I can tell you, in the academic world as to what it is or what it isn't. The advantage we have in dairying is that we've got a lot of organic matter we can put on. The disadvantage is that often our soils have got a lot of organic matter in them anyway, and that includes phosphorus as well as carbon and other factors as well. So there's two big unknowns there in terms of that equation. We generate lots of data in terms of cow performance, and the dairy industry is very well placed for that because we do record a lot more things and we're used with recording things. But sometimes I think we just end up with too much data, that people just get, there's just too much. I mean, how many people now would look at all the data that NMR do? What we want is a simple, straightforward answer, and to get some of these different sensors and ways of measuring data just to give us a simple, straightforward answer rather than another set of information that a farmer has to look at. So data is very important. I think the dairy industry is very well placed, but I think there's some big unknowns in terms of carbon as to what we're actually doing and what the effect is.
Lovely, thank you, Liam. We'll move on. I think probably the next few questions are a bit sort of obviously those two we've just had are very, very large and very broad in nature. So the next one is much more focused. So come to you, Ed. What is your opinion on farmers collaborating to create diversification opportunities? And John mentioned AD investments, but it could be biogas supplies, etc. Things that will help achieve net zero.
On the AD front and on the outset, it seems like a no-brainer, especially with AD. The benefits you can get from economies of scale in terms of nutrient stripping and processing to that digestate post AD are fantastic. If you've got a small on-farm AD plant, then you're going to have a dispersion of your energy and your focus, and so it's probably a different skill set. So if you can collaborate with neighbouring farmers and maybe have a third party in there that's going to manage the AD plant fantastically. Practically speaking, very different. Farmers are very much focused on what's within their own fence and their own stock and their own business, and it's very difficult for farmers to collaborate. And in fact, generally speaking, we're normally competing for resources or for the contractor to come and mow my grass, not the neighbour's grass, and that sort of thing. And so I think that it's basically going to need like a succession plan or some sort of third-party involvement to help. Okay, well, what are the goals? How's it going to set out? How do you ensure fairness and somebody coming in from an outside to help that collaboration? But it definitely, the majority of the muck from our farms would be better if it was processed through an AD plant and we were creating energy from it. It would be better if we could then process and concentrate them nutrients and we could export them to places where it's required. And really, you know, it should be the case that we're not having problems with NVZs and we're actually making money from processing them nutrients alongside the other products and milk that we produce.
Liam, I'm going to come back to you now as you sort of as a follow-on, really, because you mentioned the, best use of organic fertilizers, but they're all, as you mentioned, there's also the downside of phosphates, etc. But how do you see AD fitting into the bigger picture?
I think AD can. Again, sometimes we maybe need to take a step back. If we look at something like solar panels, for example, which is another means to both generate income for a farm, but also to reduce your carbon footprint. But if you look at the carbon footprint from energy use on a dairy farm, it's only a few percentage, 2 or 3%. It's not very big. But I think there's a good economic argument for farmers to considering how much roof space they have, of putting up something like solar panels to make more money. That's a profitability aspect, and there's lots of, as long as you're close to a grid to tap that into, that's a business decision. But it isn't really going to reduce your carbon footprint very much, and I think you need to be aware of that. Other things then, such as AD, I mean, AD slurry is good to go in, but it's already been pre-fermented. So you often need some other carbon source in there to be able to generate the electricity from it. It's usually got lots of nitrogen. It needs something else in there. So you then have to consider, is that food waste, or is that something that you've grown on the farm, maize, grass, etc.? And then we get into a food, fuel, feed argument as to how we use the land and what is the best way that we should do that as a country. Should we be generating electricity from it? Should we be generating food from it? Should we be generating feed from it? And things such as food security, you know, for a long while they were less important in terms of government mind, but I think maybe they've become a bit more now. And it's not something that we should forget, is that, you know, we are producing food. That's what the business is about.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of economies of scale, in terms of AD units, then yes, it'll depend on the logistics. Getting forage to a central AD unit is okay. Getting slurry from your cows maybe less so. So it'll depend on the individual opportunities there. And other aspects which are also important in terms of slurry management, you know, include things such as nitrous oxide, which is a very potent greenhouse gas. So things such as the slurry storage that we've spoken about, timing of applying it, all those things which we are familiar with, we do know, but they are important in terms of reducing our carbon footprint.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Liam. John, before I come to you, I'm just going to add a little bit as well, because at the moment, diversification such as, well, is it diversification? You know, the use of renewables on farms, even trees and forestry, they're not currently allocated to an inventory where agriculture gets a credit for undertaking that activity. So it's a sort of two questions. So yes, if farmers do take on, you know, sort of take up more ADs, how will they be recognised, or agriculture as a whole would be recognised for undertaking activities that sort of, underpin but are actually reported in other inventories?
Okay, I'm not sure I can answer that question, to be honest, but it's a good question to ask me. I mean, diversification is important, I think, for farmers to look at. I think that the options and opportunities are there for farmers to look at. We've touched upon some of them with AD plants and the like. How that's recorded and farmers have benefits, I think it's a bigger picture here. About comes back to that question about data again, about how we can actually collate and utilise some of that on-farm data to demonstrate achievement towards net zero. And DEFRA are doing some research on this, and you know, it may be through the dairy roadmap we can look at where some of that might be able to coincide and we can get a mutual benefit from. But I think that's part of the work we need to do, is to be able to demonstrate what the actual benefits that come from some of the activities that are done on farm. And Liam said a lot of the data just isn't there. We think we know what we're going to do, we think we know what the outcomes are, but we don't actually yet have the evidence to demonstrate that. So that's the answer to that sort of answer to that
Sorry
question.
to put you on the spot
That's
on
all
that
right.
one,
Yeah, that
John.
wasn't on the list originally, but don't worry. I was just going to come back to the question we're looking at, and I didn't want to go into too much detail on some of the funding, but I think it's come up. SFI and the environmental land management schemes. There are a number of measures that do enable farmers, both individually and corporately, to working with other farmers to actually bring about some of the net zero targets. So there are a number of practices under landscape recovery that look at emissions, preserving habitats, some landscape scale changes, some of the more wider green finance initiatives. There's the UK Woodland Carbon Code, the UK peat Carbon Code, where there is that opportunity to look at things on a bigger scale and to act together with other farmers. And I also should have mentioned, of course, the Animal Health and Welfare Pathway, which of course does give funding to farmers to help improve animal health and welfare. And I think we've identified, you know, good healthy animals are going to help you both profitably and productively, but also in terms of carbon emissions. So, you know, there is lots there. it's knowing when and how to access it, and whether that's something that can be done by individual farmers or whether there is that opportunity to collaborate where it's in the business needs of, and benefits of a farmer, but also where they can then start to demonstrate some of those bigger steps towards achieving net zero in the longer term. And how we measure that, of course, equally important.
Okay, lovely. Thank you, John. Lyndon, have you anything to add?
Well, I think that farmers working together is a great idea. I'm not sure how effective it is. I know groups of farmers who work together brilliantly, but then others, they see their neighbours as being their competition. So the idea is good. AD, in theory, large-scale AD could work if there was farmers that were close enough to each other, and they could all get together and look at the big picture. And I think it would be fantastic. I don't know of very many cases where it's actually working at the moment, but also you need to be relatively close, because if you're 15 miles from your next farmer, the cost of tracking your slurries 15 miles, the environmental cost of doing that would outweigh any benefits you might get. So, but I do believe that the potential for more smaller scale ADs is getting better all the time. I think the new systems, the smaller systems that can be farm-based, where you don't have to track anything anywhere, it can feed it on gravity and be used locally. I think that's probably got more advantage going forward, but I think their efficiency is improving all the time. They're not like the big ones yet, but the progress is quite quick now, and having seen a few that have been put in, they do seem to be relatively effective. I think the thing that's stopping farmers doing that is a lot of farmers are looking at the future and all the regulations and all the issues and the profitability, and they're saying, if I put this in, I want to make sure I'm here for 20 years. And if you actually ask farmers, are you definitely going to be doing this job for the next 20 years? There's not very many that will say definitely yes. And putting in an AD is something that you need that sort of commitment for. So that's probably why it hasn't taken off more than it has already.
Okay, lovely. Thank you, Lyndon. So, sort of moving on a bit from not diversification as such, but looking at other financial opportunities. So, and I know, Ed, I'm going to direct this one towards you, is, you know, what are the opportunities for farmers to trade carbon credits or partner with corporate organisations as Rabobank's Carbon Bank initiative? Now, I think you're probably in a good position to comment on how that's worked.
Well, we were in a position where we created carbon credits from that, measuring the reduction in methane emissions. And the idea of that was that then it created a financial incentive for other farmers that didn't have a product like we did that we sold directly to coffee shops. And so even in a scenario like we had, where we had a product that we sold directly to coffee shops, where we had customers that care, we've got to negotiate a price. And in a negotiation, it's very difficult to say, okay, well, we've reduced our emissions, so now we'd like an extra 10 pence per litre, please. It's just not how things work. And so to be able to create a incentive mechanism there that meant other farms could do it regardless of whether they were supplying a niche product was a really good step forward. Still challenging, so some of the areas that are challenging is, okay, well, how do you measure it? How do you know that there's actual value created? How do you have transparency within the system and traceability to say, okay, well, this carbon credit's been created. How do we know that we've not sold it to 10 different people and that there's not been fraud in the industry? And so it's important that these technologies are developed there to get beyond some of the complexities of the data and to progress the traceability and transparency of trading them carbon credits. Another challenge with carbon credits are that they're effectively liabilities to the purchaser, so it's only companies like Microsoft that are customer facing and very profitable can afford to buy them. And probably the lever that we need to avoid man-made climate change needs to be bigger than only them few companies that are in that position buying carbon credits. And so my whole Nuffield has been around, okay, what new technology there around AI for complexity, and I know we're at the UK Dairy day. So when I say AI there, I'm talking about artificial intelligence, not trying to get a cow pregnant. There's blockchain in terms of transparency and traceability, and other technologies there that I'm looking at that's all relatively new to say, okay, well, how might that develop this area of initiatives? That's all I'll say on that for now, because I'm going to be presenting that in November, so you'll have to listen in for further results on that.
Okay, lovely. Thank you, Ed. Lyndon, from your point of view, you know, how does this fit with your systems, and also what about the future and potentially supply chain expectations?
I think that the one thing we've got to remember is if we've got credit, we can only use it once. And I think that there's going to be lots of people wanting that credit. It may seem very attractive to be able to sell it. How we measure it and how we can guarantee it's there in the first place could also be difficult. But going forward, dairy processors are sort of saying, well, is it the farm's credit or is it their credit? I mean, there's already argument about who has the credit now. So I think we just have to be careful that if we do something in the short term, make sure we don't actually need it in the long term. So I'm not against looking into it, but I think that I'm probably a little more cautious than the person sitting next to me. But I think that there's many ways that farmers are going to make money going forward. The environment will definitely be one of the possibilities, as well as producing food. But as I said, you can only count things once. And I know farmers will have someone come up the road and say, oh, this is a wonderful opportunity, but be very careful because you can't sell the same thing twice.
Thank you, Lyndon. Liam.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when milk quotas came in, because I am old enough to remember that, and the uncertainty amongst the farming industry, dairy farming industry, as to whether they should sell, whether they should rent, whether they should buy. And we kind of have that similarly with these carbon credits, but it's going on for a longer period of time. You can have voluntary and compulsory markets, and we work under a voluntary market in terms of agriculture. But again, I go back to the unknowns. If you do something to reduce your carbon output, how do you know it's actually achieved it? You can do the calculations as to 30% reduction in methane if you include a product in there would be round about a ton of carbon dioxide equivalent or so. But I'm not sure going down the line what the compulsory is where the government says we want an industry, you have to reduce it. We don't have that. But we may have that in the future where we're being told that we need to get down to a particular level, or there may be penalties as a consequence of that. And we are one of the more higher producing in terms of our products because of all the methane that we spoke about earlier in relation to rumen fermentation. So I would, somebody likened it to kind of the Wild West in terms of carbon credits, and Ed's got a lot more experience, and I know he's doing his Nuffield on it, so I will bow to his knowledge on that. I would be hesitant at this point. I think Lyndon's comment about you get one opportunity, and we don't quite know how it's going to pan out. If you do, and then you have to reduce levels by a certain amount. Well, if you're already feeding a product to suppress it, you haven't got a chance to do that again. So I'm genuinely a little bit unsure, as I think a lot of people are. There's a lot of people outside of agriculture who are interested in it. And when you start to do that, I also get nervous that when you get people outside agriculture who know nothing about dairy farming, who decide that they want to speculate on it, I begin to get a little bit nervous. But maybe that's just me being a little bit unsure about things. Ed's got a lot more experience than me. He obviously feels more confident. I'm a little bit more hesitant at this point for those reasons.
Okay, thanks, Liam. John, do you want to add? And then I think Ed wants to come back as well.
Sure. Yeah, I'll be as brief as I can. I mean, first of all, we're very much committed to supporting and empowering farmers in taking advantage of carbon markets where their business model, their land, and their ambitions do match that. And I think Linda's point is a good one. Don't sell your family inheritance away too quickly. Make sure this is a decision that's right for your business in the short and long term. I've mentioned the Woodland Carbon Code and the UK Peatland Code, which are probably the two most mature models that exist in the UK for reducing and removing greenhouse emissions. I think we've talked about the challenges that farmers face in that sort of lack of clarity around what constitutes a high integrity unit, market rules, what evidence is needed, and access to the tools that are actually enable you to participate in sort of this investment-ready approach. DEFRA has supported the Green Finance Institute to develop a free farming toolkit for assessing opportunities in nature markets, and I would commend that to you. It's available. It sets out an 8-step journey to investment readiness for nature project developments. The toolkit was designed and tested with a diverse group of over 100 farmers of various sizes, different sectors, ownership structures, including tenant farmers and also regions. And we're also funding the British Standards Institution to develop a nature investment standards, which will further, I think, drive up the scale of high integrity nature markets for the UK. So there are things there. The toolkit particularly, I think, is worthwhile getting access to and looking at what the steps are and how that might benefit you as a farm.
Lovely. Thank you, John. Ed, I know you've been chomping at the bit to come back, so...
Yeah, I just kind of wanted to come back to this kind of Wild West analogy on carbon credits. The Wild West analogy, really, it's just describing a developing market. And yes, it's developing, and yes, it's changing, but that's also where lots of opportunities lie. So if people don't engage in that, they're never going to make the most of them opportunities, despite there being some risk. The risk isn't that you're going to get shot like you would in the Wild West, so it is a lot less than it might have been. And also, farmers are hugely important globally. We're going to have to feed nearly 10 billion people. We're responsible for the land that lots of the other biodiversity live on. We currently create lots of emissions, even though essential whilst producing that food. And we've got the opportunity to sequester carbon. So ultimately, farmers are going to have to provide these environmental services to help with mitigation of climate change and to help with reducing biodiversity. Why not? So we're either going to be controlled or told to do that, either with a carrot or a stick. If we don't engage in developing some of the solutions, working with some of the carrots and developing what the carrot might look like and how we might get paid, we're just going to get the stick. We're going to get legislation, and we're going to get our milk buyers and the people with the power in the industry telling us what to do, and we're going to get no benefit from it. So for us, it's about engaging in solutions and developing in that and making sure the farmers in the room having the conversation about, okay, this is what we can do, this is what we'd like to do, this is how we'd like to get paid. Because if we don't, we're just going to get the stick. And so that's why I feel like it's important for us to engage, not necessarily sell the family silver, which I'm not even sure you could do as carbon credits anyway, but Lyndon tells me that's possible, but at least developing solutions there as farmers that make us get paid for providing the services that we're going to have to provide as an industry.
Thank you, Ed. Are there any questions from the audience specific to that or previously? Steve? We've probably got time for one or two questions, and then I'm going to finish off by asking each of the panel if there's one piece of advice for farmers in terms of prioritising the available options within their control. Which one would they choose to help head towards net zero? So, okay, Steve.
Hi, Delyth. Steve Dunkley from HSBC Agriculture. My question kind of comes back to the root cause of why there's a lot of focus on carbon, and I think Ed mentioned it, man-made climate change. Is there actually enough focus being given to the industry in terms of what they need to do to adapt to what we might see in the next 25, 30, 50, 100 years around climate change? I think we get very focused on carbon emissions to reduce carbon emissions, but that still only gets us to 1.5 degrees increase in 2050. So heat stress, extreme weather conditions, longer growing seasons, is there enough focus being put on that to help farmers adapt?
Okay. I'll just answer that quickly, and then I'll, well, in terms of, HDB's been asked now to report to DEFRA in terms of climate adaptation, so what the industry is doing to adapt to climate change. in the short term, but also what we've already realised is that long-term strategy, looking further ahead, say, than 2030, 2040, and one of the scenarios is actually looking at 2100 and what that might look like and what we need to put in place as an industry to be able to survive, but also what would the industry look like by then if the temperature has increased dramatically. Agriculture could look very different in those terms. Anybody else, any specific comments on that? So I think, Steve, coming from an HDB point of view, would be something we'll be putting more emphasis on going forward. So it's mitigation and adaptation. Anyone? No? Okay. Yeah, go on, John.
Just really quickly, I mean, it's a really good question. And we just look at the last few years. Last year we had problems with drought. This year we had problems with wet weather. It is here now. The poultry sector suffered extreme problems last year with heat stress. So it is a problem. We do need to address it. And it's only going to be done by, I think, that collaboration. Again, is we've got to get the data, we've got to get the information, we've got to look at what the opportunities and options are and do our best to implement them, because if we don't, we've already started to see the effects.
Thank you. I think there's a question of the gentleman on the corner. Oh, sorry, at the back there.
Thank you. It's around the, I think Lyndon made mention to knowing where we are now, benchmarking, understanding what the current picture looks like for your carbon footprint, whatever you care to term it as. Is there going to be any guidance that allows or shapes towards one metric being used to analyse all that data, to gather that data? There are a number of different ways of measuring it that could be conducted on the same site and come out with different answers. Is there going to be a lead on what good looks like?
Mm-hmm. I think we could probably split that into a couple of areas. So obviously carbon calculators being one of them, but also just the MRV for the reporting verification for carbon stocks in particular. Liam, is this an area where...
I think it's an excellent question, and I think there really needs to be a lead on that. I think farmers are struggling to see how they can use different calculators, end up with different values, not being able to measure things that are key components going in. And there needs to be some clarity there. You know, other countries do often have a more sort of government approach, whether it's looking at fertility in Scandinavia or environmental aspects, having a standard way of recording things. You might disagree with that. They might not be ideal, but at least everybody's working in the same direction. And rather than infighting and arguing this is better than another, you can focus a lot more. I think there needs to be clear direction. I think it has to come from government to do that. That there is a set of parameters. You can have different companies, but you have to follow it this way. And if we don't have that, we're going to struggle to move forward. We do in this country like to have lots of different competition there between things. Other countries say, nah, this is the way it's got to be. We're all going to do it. Sorry if you don't like it, but we're going to have the one system and we're going to move towards that. I think we need that, and I think we need clear direction from government. If I'm being critical, I think the Labour's manifesto was appallingly low in terms of what it paid towards agriculture, and this is one element within that. I think we need to start getting leadership on that.
Yeah. Thank you, Liam. Lyndon, do you want to come in at that point?
Yeah, just briefly, I think I agree with what Liam said. I mean, 3 years ago we had the ability to use 50 different calculators to work out what we were producing. I think the reality is now, the roadmap was telling me the other day that there's probably about 8, but they've all coalescing so that they're all getting much more similar in what they're recording. So that's good progress. It's not one, but at least we're making progress, whereas 3 years ago I didn't know where to start to look, to be honest. So I think we're getting better, but we got a long way to go.
Okay. Thank you, Lyndon. We are running short of time, so one final last question to the panel. So if there's one piece of advice in terms of prioritising options for farmers in heading towards net zero, what would that be? Liam, I'll start with you.
Thanks for an easy question. I would say get into the top 25%, preferably the top 5% of performance and profitability for two reasons. First of all, the close relationship that we spoke about in terms of technical efficiency and reducing your carbon cost. And secondly, it's about making profit, it's about making money. If you can do that, then you can afford to put up a new slurry store or put a cover over it or to put in some piece of equipment. So it's that focus on profitability, getting in that top 25%. It'll reduce your carbon cost, but it'll also mean that you can afford to overcome your milk purchasers' requirements, government requirements, Environment Agency requirements, whatever they are, and be able to do it. If you're not making a profit, it doesn't matter how environmentally friendly or low cost your milk is, you're not going to be there in the future. So focus on the basics, get in the top 5%.
Okay, thank you. Lyndon, since you've got the mic.
I think the easy win for farmers, yes, you've got to have profitability, but if there's one area to focus on, it's got to be genetics, because that goes across all farming systems from fully housed to fully grazed, and you've got the ability to make up to 3% progress per year. 3% progress per year, and that's cumulative. So every time you get another generation, you've banked that 3% and you can go for continuing your 3%. If you're right at the top of the game, that's the benefits that's possible. But don't just look at milk, fat, protein. It's important, but it's not all bulls can give you that now. Look at the other indexes. Look at the EnviroCow, the healthy cow. If you're in a bad TB area, TB resistance. All of these things are the new blueprints for people to have healthy cows that are a pleasure to work with and profitable.
Thank you, Lyndon. John?
Sure. Obviously, as DEFRA, I'm not going to give any farmer advice on any particular steps. That's for their business decision to make. But I think what I would suggest is that for farmers, one of the best things I think you can do is actually understand what your carbon footprint is at the moment. So we've just talked about the different tools. My understanding is they are getting closer to each other these days. But actually what gets measured can be managed. So I think understanding that, and just to reiterate, DEFRA is keen to work with the industry and the sector on a sort of strategy for moving towards net zero. We've got the dairy roadmap. I'm speaking at the Dairy UK event on Friday. I think continuing this work as an industry in partnership, I think, is going to move us in the right direction at least. So I commend that to you and support us in helping you get to do that.
Great, thanks, John. And the last words, Ed?
Yeah, it'd just be work smarter, not harder, and look at what opportunities there are to better understand the data within your own business and what drives the profitability. And generally speaking, what drives the profitability will make you a more efficient business as well. But yeah, understanding the effect you have on the environment and the planet in order to try and improve that should hopefully make you a better business too.
Lovely, thank you. Well, I'd like to thank the panel for their input today. It's been really interesting. I hope you found that too, and thank you all for coming, and I hope you found it useful. And yes, if you want to speak to any of us, please do so. Thank you.